Welcome back, everyone, and welcome to those who have joined us in the last couple of minutes. And thank you again for joining us today on how to close the phishing security gap. Brought to you today by GoSecure, where I'm proudly the SVP of Product Management. While you take a quick glance at that, just to give you a sense on my 25 years here in this industry, throughout the entire time I've been part of security and technology, I have always had my fingers in email security, both from the traditional gateway side of things as well as through the solution that we'll talk about at the end of today's presentation. So email security has always been near and dear to my heart. And so it's interesting for us to be able to talk about new ways to protect ourselves, not at the expense of any of the old ways. We still need those, and those are still vitally important. But phishing is obviously high in the media attention today as it leads to things like ransomware and some of the large breaches that we've read about in the past year. And by all accounts, it's not going to go away anytime soon, particularly because it's still effective. So without any further ado, let's get to the first question that I've heard over the past 4 years that we've had our inbox detection and response solution. And that is, well, we already have a secure email gateway. Why do I need something else? And I will say it's been an interesting journey for me to watch this conversation. When I first started, we heard this quite a bit. I have a gateway. Why are messages getting past that gateway? And I would explain the gateways were designed for a very different problem to solve. They were designed from the outset to address the high volumes of email, the increasingly volume of email that we continue to see on a daily basis, but they were never designed to address these small, immediate campaigns, these highly focused campaigns, whether it's phishing, spear phishing, or just rapidly evolving campaigns. So your gateways, your secure email gateways, are still an absolutely vital component of your multi-layered security infrastructure. You need to have them. They do what they were designed to do very, very well. They do continue to iterate and evolve, although not the same rate as they did in years past. It is a very mature solution, similar to traditional antivirus. You need it, it's necessary, but it has gaps. And over the 4-year journey that I've been involved with inbox detection and response, I've seen that question of why do things get past my gateway go away and completely eliminate. I've not heard that question in probably 2 years. It's now a case of everybody recognizes that messages are getting passed. So we don't need to ask how or why. We need to ask, what do we do about that? And if we need any more proof that messages are getting passed or why, let's look at a quick set of statistics that we have here from various sources. Google, as you can imagine, through Gmail and their Google business, see an awful lot of email on any given day. And they had some interesting research recently about the types of campaigns related specifically to phishing. And these help to address why the traditional gateways have troubles with them. These campaigns are fast churning, they change quickly, and they're based on very small target ranges. And that target range is going to be so small for a variety of reasons, not the least of which to evade your traditional email gateway. Again, gateways are designed to address a volume, not very small focused campaigns. They're also addressed or designed to learn, the gateways are, but these campaigns that are brief and bursting don't give the gateways enough time to learn. They can pick up on some iterations, but then the iterations will change quickly and enough to get past the traditional gateways. And you can see there the final statistic there, single campaign, these small email campaigns with very focused targets, but still averaging over 100 million phishing messages per week. That is a huge volume. Now, again, that's global, and Google, obviously, through their Gmail service, sees an awful lot of email, but that just gives you a sense on the volume of phishing emails that we're seeing on any given basis or any given day. And they fall into these categories, these brief, bursty, multi-iterative, fast iterative campaigns. We see that a lot here at GoSecure with our own email security research. We have our own traditional gateway, which I'm not here to talk about today, and through our inbox detection and response service. And we see rapid iterations. And in fact, I'll show you a couple examples of those later on in this presentation. So that's the world of just phishing email statistics. If you combine that with phishing email breach statistics, it's just equally scary. And I'm not one to talk about FUD, but I just want to give some context here. No surprise, I think, to probably anyone that 75% of organizations have experienced a phishing attack. And that could just simply be a phishing email that got through their traditional gateway and ended up in an inbox. 75 times more phishing sites than malware sites. I remember it wasn't that long ago where we would caution our end users. Early in my career, I was an implementer of security and sent those emails out to our users, being careful not to open emails with URLs in them, being careful not to go to sites that look even remotely suspicious. But those were based on malware sites, downloading malware. Now we have phishing sites, which are doing things like credential scraping. Their only job in life is to get credentials, which then lead to the next step of the potential breach. And 96% of social engineering attacks are delivered by email. This is going to be, again, that credential scraping. This can be your business email compromise, a variety of different tactics, but 96%. That's in comparison to, say, messages that are coming in via SMS or text. And those types are actually increasing. V-phishing is increasing as well, where voicemail is growing in popularity. Some method of engaging with these end users and having them some way activate or provide data. But this, again, is the world we're living in today. And I don't think this surprises anybody, but when you put the data points in front of you, it creates a very interesting picture. And again, not to scare us. We know this. This is nothing new. We just need to recognize that phishing is here. It's here to stay, whatever that means in today's world. And we need to be aware of it and take advantage of new approaches to dealing with this. And then factor in through all of this what we've been experiencing for the last 18 months with the pandemic, the immediate work from home. People who have never ever worked from home are now working from home. And if certain places are considering allowing employers and employees back into the office, the users are questioning the value of that. Why do I need to come back in the office? And so there's this growing demand for the remote work or work from home, which, not here to argue about that, but just to illustrate that with that, 56% of IT leaders believe that working from home makes it harder to prevent data breaches caused by human error. As humans, we are only human, which means we are fallible, we make mistakes. But I have long contended that the blurring of personal and professional lives has only increased as the digital transformation has happened, as we are increasingly connected. It started with phones, then your tablets, now you've got your laptops, now everybody's working from home. My wife has never worked from home. She works for a hospital here in the fundraising department, and she's been from home for 18 months now and absolutely works perfectly with that. But on her laptop, provided by her office, there's this blurring of lines. And so users are being asked to do more in a home environment, which is not always protected by a lot of the same things we take for granted when we're at the office, a firewall of all things. We've got our local routers here at home, and how secure are they for most people? Probably not. So these users are at home. Many of them are choosing to stay home, which has caused IT leaders to rethink how they deal with this and accept the fact that humans are fallible, and how do we protect that type of world? Well, at least one organization around the world has said this is a big issue. And so the US federal government, President Biden signed an executive order effectively urging, forcing, funding, choose the word you want, US federal agencies to increase their cybersecurity protections. This is a broad spectrum. This is across the gamut here. But this is how bad the issue has become, that we need an executive order to force the funding down and to force organizations to rethink how they're looking at it. So this is affecting organizations across the spectrum of all sizes. I used to hear from many, many organizations, I'm too small to be a target. That is no longer the case. Go back to the Google statistics. I've heard from many organizations, I'm so large I can handle it. That is no longer the case. Some of our customers, some of the largest organizations around the world, everybody recognizes they can use a little more help some way, somehow. And the phishing problem has become epidemic to a certain extent. I'm not trying to use that word, especially in light of what's going on with COVID, but it is the world that everybody has to deal with today. And so we talk about user training. Users have been involved in the process for many, many years. It has been the answer for messages that get past the inbox or get past the gateway and reach the inbox. Again, I remember as an implementer myself many years ago, sending the emails out to users. If you don't know who it's from, don't open it. If it's an attachment, it looks even remotely suspicious, or you're unsure, don't open it. Don't click on that link. We have been doing this for a very long time, almost for as long as we've had email in volume. And user training is still necessary and important, but is it the answer to this problem? Or training users appropriately enough and well enough to deal with this? Well, if you look at a couple of more data points, 95% of organizations deliver user training. And that can be anything from a structured plan that is done on a periodic basis, whether it's monthly, quarterly, annually, 95% are doing some level of user training. That just verifies that it's necessary. Whether it's valuable or works or not is a completely different question, but is it necessary? Is it being done today? It absolutely is. And yet, 22% of breaches still involve phishing. These are the messages that have gotten past your gateway, are now sitting in a user's inbox, asking them to do something, whether it's open an attachment, click on a link, or send credentials. So despite the number or the volume of training that we're doing, we're still having breaches that are involving phishing. So it's working, it's helping, but it's not addressing the full problem. And so the question then becomes why? If we're training the users, if we've been reminding them for so many years to be attentive and to be careful, why is it not solving the problem? And not that anybody's suggesting this is the silver bullet to solve the problem, but why aren't we doing any better? Well, part of it is this here. It's called the forgetting curve. And I've done a lot of research into this to truly understand. And it's a simple fact that if you train somebody, teach somebody about something over time, unless they continue to reuse it or it's reinforced, they will forget a large percentage of that over a period of days. That's just human nature. If you do something over and over and over, you will remember it, you'll get better at it. But if you're told about something on a Monday, the following Monday, you will have forgotten a lot of it if you don't have it reinforced on a daily basis or on a regular basis, a good solid periodic basis. Now, this does not mean that humans can't remember. So the more often you do training, the better they will remember it. So when 95% of organizations are doing user awareness type training, that's positive. We urge organizations to do that. We are not saying the training is ineffective. It is highly effective, particularly if you do it on a regular periodic basis. Again, whether that's quarterly, whether that's monthly, whatever works best for you, continue to do this, and that curve from the bottom just keeps moving upward, and the retention level gets higher. So users will get better at it. But the thing to keep in mind is they'll never get perfect at it. Now, whether that's because of that blurring between professional and business lives, because it's too hard when our email inboxes are full on a daily basis, whatever the reason, users will never be perfect with this. So if you look at the most recent Verizon DBIR report, a wealth of great information there, you'll see that in fact, the click rate is very low in phishing simulation, directly related to how often users are being trained. The more often they receive this reinforcement to be careful and to receive some kind of productive response back to this training, the more attentive they will be. And yet the median click rate is still 3% for organizations that are doing regular end user training. And in fact, that number goes higher for a lot of organizations that are doing regular training. The problem here is that it's a cliche, but it's a truism that it only takes one. It only takes one click for something to happen. It's like having insurance for your car. You know you need it. You hope you never use it, but that one time you do need it, you're glad you have it. It's the same thing here. 3% median click rate is a very low click rate, and we want that number to go lower. But that's still 3% higher because it only takes one to become part of that 22% of breaches that involve phishing. So you need something else in addition to the training to help users make that decision, to involve them in the security process. And involving them in the security process is asking them to look at messages like this. And I mentioned earlier in the presentation that I have samples. This is a sample of a message that we received here as part of our inbox detection and response service. And you'll notice there's very little here, but we've seen messages like this all the time. The amount of content here is extremely low. Sure looks official, attached invoice is rejected. Great, here's the invoice at the bottom. If you can pop this open and let us know what's wrong, and we'll go ahead and process that. Very simple, very effective, has everything. It even has a disclaimer at the bottom. So there's a lot of information here that lends to the legitimacy or the apparent legitimacy of the message. But as soon as that user opens up that spreadsheet, they are now infected with the maldoc. It reaches out and connects and brings the malware back down. That's the level of sophistication, although it looks unsophisticated here, that the criminals are dealing with today. They're using this type of approach to hook unsuspecting users who have been trained, and yet you've got this very basic, simple little email. In fact, it gets even funnier when you look at it, because then you have one that's very, very similar, albeit in Portuguese. It's not the exact same thing. It's actually one for an RFP, but look at how similar it is. They are now also attaching an XLS, but this one as well is doing the same thing as the previous one. It's going to be dropping down malware onto this user's endpoint. This is the type of world that users are being asked to operate in. We're asking end users to almost be security professionals in and of themselves, albeit at a very low level, by making decisions. And looking at this email here, even in Portuguese, it looks fairly official. That's what we're asking users to do. And that's why you still have that median 3%, if not higher, despite all the user training. Because in the middle of a day, something like this comes through and somebody is just too busy to pay just a little bit of attention, and they opened up that XLS to see what's going on. It's an RFQ. My goodness, we could actually get business out of this. Let's see what's going on here. Boom, the damage is done. And so when you talk about empowering users, some of the industry analysts have been talking about this for quite a while. And so we're asking our employees to act as controls. And there's absolutely valid reason for doing that. But we need to put this in perspective. We can't just blindly say, I've trained them and so they must be doing well, because we have sufficient data to say that's not the case. What we're doing is we must help them understand the challenge and give them the tools to be an active part to proactively help us detect unusual activity. And if that unusual activity is nothing more than looking at the previous email and saying, sounds official, but all I know I need to do is have this message reviewed by an expert, an email security expert. And then I can understand for sure, is this something I should or should not open? And shouldn't take too long to figure that out. But I don't want to take that chance myself as an end user, because I know I have a way of doing that. That's how you can help employees be part of the process, be part of your security, without asking them to be cybersecurity professionals at whatever level is appropriate for your organization. So that's where the idea for GoSecure inbox detection and response came from. The idea came from this reality that messages are getting past the traditional gateway. They're getting to an end user's inbox, and security training has proven to be mostly effective, but we're still dealing with this user community who's being asked to make decisions. And we see enough examples where that decision-making process is not perfect. It's not 100% spot on. And so what we did with GoSecure IDR is we created this solution that removes the question of, is this good or bad, from the end user. We've given them and created for them a simple tool that allows them to submit a message for review. And they can then know they've done the right thing. And then what happens next is completely at the behest of technology, as well as human experts whose only job in life is to figure out, is this message good or bad, and then let the user know in a very quick and expedient fashion. So GoSecure IDR is a very simple solution. In fact, I'll show you a live version of it here in just a moment as I walk through this process. But it starts with a message reaches a user's inbox. Again, for whatever reason it got past the gateway, it's now in an end user's inbox. So the first step is the user looks at it and says, my SAE training told me to do this, but I'm still not sure. At that point, all the user has to do is submit the message for review using an Outlook ribbon add-in that's added automatically when the service is enabled. Once the message is submitted, it is removed from the end user's inbox and placed in administrative quarantine until the classification process has completed. The user is notified by receiving an email showing them the message has been submitted, you've been notified, and it's no longer in your inbox. Give us a few minutes to look through this. So the user is aware of what they've done. They have the notification to validate that they've done the right thing. They're now waiting for an answer. The first check that we do is an automated check to understand very quickly if we can determine if this message is or is not malicious. That's what we're looking through for automation. We're running this against all known malicious indicators that we have. If the message is malicious, we will notify the user immediately. And then over 50% of the times we can do it with that automated check. For the remaining messages, the entire threat landscape is sent up to the user, or to our threat analysts in our active response center. The email, any intelligence we've gleaned from automation, is now presented to a human reviewer whose only job again in life is to take a look at the message and figure out if this message is good or bad or not. So in those previous examples where we had that XLS spreadsheet attachment, in a virtual machine, they will open that up and they will follow the complete chain and understand if the user had opened this up, what would have happened. And that is where we learned in both of those examples I showed earlier that the maldoc was dropped onto the endpoint. That's the level of detail our human analysts are doing. If there's a URL there, they will click it and see. And in many of the cases we get that are phishing messages, we are resulting in a phishing site that's looking for credentials. It looks official. In fact, it could be self-branded or branded exactly as a company may look. We've seen some that are nigh impossible to tell the difference from the official Office portal login site, for example. But all these sites are doing is looking for credentials. And so we do the checks on all that. We do the checks on the domain. We do the checks on the sending email server, where it's from. If it's sitting in the middle of a sensitive area, why is it all of a sudden communicating? We do all of this level of checking to make that classification. And ultimately, we're coming up with the red, yellow, or green. Obviously, green is good. Message is then sent back to the user, and they receive a notification of this. Red is the message is bad. The message is malicious for whatever reason. It remains in administrator quarantine, but again, the user is notified. Yellow is there's nothing malicious in the email itself. There's no attachment, there's no URL, but the words used, the content of the message used in the body are highly indicative of suspicious campaigns that we've seen in the past. It could be an email that purports to come from your bank or from a vendor claiming to change the routing number on sending payment, and please update your records or do something differently. We cannot tell if that particular vendor is accurate, if anything about that vendor is right or wrong. We can tell you there's nothing in the email malicious, but that this terminology, this content has been used in the past. So tread cautiously, tread lightly, call that vendor up. Don't use the email, call them up to see if they actually sent this email. Be cautious with that. That's what yellow tends to be. That entire process that I went through actually takes less than the amount of time it took me to describe it. On average, in less than 5 minutes, users are made aware of the classification of the message that they submitted. And again, if it's green, it's put right back in their inbox where it was originally pulled from. If it's red, it stays in administrator quarantine. And if it's yellow, if it's cautious, that's up to your administrator to decide how to respond to that. Either, again, put it back or leave it in administrator quarantine. That's the beauty of this process, is that users don't have to know right from wrong. They just need to submit a message, and then they need to feel comfortable and know that within 5 minutes, they will have a definitive answer from an email security expert. What I'd like to do here real quickly while we're waiting on this is I'm going to come in here and show you. Here I have an email that came from outside my organization. So what I'm going to do is come up here and submit that email. First thing it does is check to see if this message has been submitted before, and has not. So I will submit the message for analysis. The ribbon we're talking about here automatically appears in everybody's inbox or Outlook when the user is enabled. You don't have to touch each endpoint. So now you see the message is gone, and we can move on back to our presentation, and we'll circle back to what happens with that here in just a moment. Oops. The Outlook ribbon, the Outlook add-in, is available to all users on all devices that are running Microsoft Outlook. So Windows, Mac, Android, and Office. We are using Microsoft APIs to connect in directly. So once we are configured and we have access into your Office 365 or Exchange environment, we automatically push out the add-in, as you saw there, for all enabled users. And we'll show you how to do that in the live demo here in just a moment. In situations where somebody is not using the Outlook client on their mobile device, either using a native Android or Apple app or an alternative app, there is a method there where messages can be submitted as well. You end up creating what's called a shared mailbox, and users forward messages to that shared mailbox, and then we scan that mailbox on a periodic basis and then perform the exact same action. So everything that I showed you and talked about, it all works identically. It's just a different method for getting into the review process. It's forwarding through this shared mailbox. So ultimately, our support is available for all users on all devices between either native Microsoft Outlook applications and clients and or this shared mailbox methodology. These are samples of the notifications we send back to end users. Again, we want the users to be eminently aware of what's going on and what we did with the message. They can always reach out to their administrators if they need to. On the yellow light one, we don't have an example of that here, but if the administrator policy is to keep that in the administrator quarantine, but the user wants to see the message or talk about it, there is a link at the bottom of the email that allows them to do that and notify the administrator that they would like to see that message or at least talk to the administrator about it. So we keep the user informed and involved throughout the entire process. But again, keep in mind this whole thing on average takes less than 5 minutes. I have talked to our email security analyst team. The longest it's ever taken them was about 15 minutes. There's a message that came through about a year or so ago. I remember talking about this that had multiple pieces, and they really wanted to dig into it. So they went that far, but they did a heck of a lot of analysis on that, well more than anything we've ever needed since then. But in all honesty, when we check across all of our customers, it is consistently well within that 5-minute range, from the message on the left, which is you submitted, to some type of a classification message you will see there on the right. We do have a full administrator console that you as administrators could connect into and see what's been going on. And I'll show you a live version of that on our demo system here in just a moment. So I won't spend too much detail here because I'll show it to you, but it does give you that visibility into what's going on, who's submitting, how are we classifying, as well as a little bit into something else we'll talk about here in just a moment, which is our incident response piece. So this is an additional element to the GoSecure IDR solution that's important. And it starts the exact same way as the other method or other solution I talked about here does, which is a user submits an email and the email goes through the process, as I've talked about, removed from quarantine or the inbox, placed in administrative quarantine, run through our checks, our various checks. But if the message is then deemed malicious, we then perform a scan on the entire mail store. And what that scan is doing is looking for additional copies of the same email. And as it finds those additional copies, it automatically removes them from the inbox and applies the policy that the administrators define. By default, malicious is to remove it. All users are then notified that this happened as well. That notification piece is configurable as well, whether you want that to happen or not. Well, we call this our global redaction, our incident response. This is we found one that's bad. Let's make sure there's no more out there. Nothing you as an administrator need to do to make this happen. Automatic, seamless, just does what it's supposed to do to protect you and the organization based on a single finding. All of this is part of the inbox detection response service. Not only that initial submission, but this global redaction incident response component. This is all part of the package, nothing additional that you need to buy here. You get IDR, you get all of this at once. And then as far as the architecture, and I did notice in looking at the registration list, we have a good cross-sampling of organizations that are attending today. So we have some that are US government or other government entities, and then we have a lot of commercial accounts. And so we do have 2 different cloud instances that allow us to communicate based on where you might be hosted for Office 365. All of this connects directly into those clouds and then delivers the messages for review to the Active Response Center. We do also support on-premise Exchange servers, the last couple of versions. We are seeing that the vast majority of our customers have migrated to Office 365, which is why we have the multiple clouds. So if you're commercial, if you're federal government, if you're state, local government, we have a method of supporting you almost irrelevant to where you are hosted as far as Office 365 goes, but the entire process is the same. We connect in with credentials you provided to us. We do everything I just talked about as far as that 6-step process. The messages that need to go to the Active Response Center for review, and then we apply policy. So there's 0 difference between either of the cloud instances that you might be hosted in. Everything we do from an IDR perspective is 100% identical. So what is the IDR advantage? What this does is IDR allows you to have a solution that involves end users, but helps address the messages that get past your traditional gateway. Some of you may be saying, well, I do that for my users already today. They submit it to me. And we've heard that quite a bit. But consistently, what we've also heard is that the process takes longer than end users would like. We've heard upwards of days for that response to get back to the end user. And is this that person's only full-time job? Do you have the breadth of experience and security threat intelligence to make that decision correct? And I use that term loosely, but to make the right decision there. By submitting to GoSecure, you are submitting to people whose only job in life is to review emails for analysis, who is combing this threat intelligence across all of our, not only our IDR customers, but all of our customers across the entire GoSecure portfolio. So our threat intelligence database is dramatically larger than almost any single internal organization can hope to find. And again, this is what we do for a living. So we remove that responsibility from you, but do it in a faster, hopefully more effective way by combining machine learning and automation with our human reviewers in a solution that completely complements security awareness. And this is very important. When I talked about user training, remember, I am not saying don't do user training. In fact, I'm saying the exact opposite. You should do it possibly more often than you are today, but don't expect it to be perfect. things will still get passed. Users will be busy. They will be fallible. Things will happen. So give them one more tool that involves them in the process, takes the guesswork out of it for you and for them, and provides a cost-effective, rapid response solution for everybody. You can rest easy, users can rest easy, but they can still apply their security awareness training. And final statistic that I have for you, this is across all of our customers for all of 2021, for all of our inbox detection response customers, of the messages that are submitted to us. So these are messages that have gotten past any traditional email security gateway. And I will say right without fail, we have every single email security vendor listed in our customer base, all the major ones anyway. 42% of messages that are submitted to us are classified as malicious. So these are messages that have got past your gateway, and 42% of them are still malicious. That is a very high number. Over the 4 years that we've had GoSecure inbox detection response, we have consistently been in that 35 to 45% range for malicious classifications. That number has not faltered by much. That is a scary proposition, that you have a gateway that does an amazing job for what it was designed to do, and yet we're still getting this many malicious messages past that. That's the value of GoSecure inbox detection responses. Your users are part of the solution in a very simple way that removes them from having to make any decision other than, I'm going to submit it, get my answer in 5 minutes. So with that, let's pop over here to a quick live demo. And what I'm showing you here is the GoSecure IDR portal. Refresh to make sure it hasn't logged me out, and it has not. So I'm going to skip the quarantine for a second because we'll come back to that in just a moment. The implementation time for GoSecure IDR can be as little as 15 minutes. We have a couple of things that need to be done on your side. You need to create an account for us. You'll see we use that here. We connect in, again, over using Microsoft APIs. Does not need to be a full administrator account. We do have a document that describes the exact permissions we need to do our jobs. We need no more, but no less. If you do all that and have that ready during the onboarding call, we can be done in 15 minutes. Reality is many times we find the permissions aren't quite set correctly, or the user's just been too busy. But the process itself is that simple, because once we do that, we connect in, we do a test connection, and we're done. I mean, quite literally, that's the extent of our configuration to get the process started. So most of the things you see here are never going to be changed. In fact, we walk through all of these with you as part of the onboarding. We do look here, for example. Remember I mentioned to you that the installing of the Outlook Ribbon add-in was invisible. You don't have to touch every desktop. That's done here, where we define which Active Directory group you want to have IDR enabled for. You could do everybody, but in most organizations, we find they have a couple of groups that might apply to all users, but don't deal with such things as system-level accounts or others. So we do recommend that you narrow this down to a specific group that IDR can use. Once we have synchronized with that group, again, using Microsoft APIs, we connect in, we check everybody's account, and we check to see if they have the Outlook add-in button or ribbon button enabled. If the answer is no, we do that automatically, and within a few minutes, it adds in. You saw how I did it there on my Outlook for Mac? That is invisible to me. I didn't have to do anything. As an administrator, I had to do nothing. Conversely, remove somebody from that group, removes it as well. So the whole process is automatic once we have defined who within your Active Directory organization could have inbox detection response. And that does include the mobile version of Outlook as well. So whether it's mobile or desktop, if I was sitting here with my iPhone right now and had Outlook open, I would have the button as well. Our administrators had nothing to do with it. License information is exactly as it sounds. How many you're licensed for? Again, this is just a demo instance here. So the numbers here aren't really relevant, but it does show you as well who is licensed for and where these people came from. So you can go through and deal with those. Classification actions is exactly as it would sound. So those classification emails and notifications that I talked about, and what we do with a message when it is classified as a certain thing, that is all configured here. So the first question is, if a message is submitted, what do you want us to do with it? We'll move it to quarantine and forward to GoSecure. You could leave it in just a quarantine and you would have to go look at it and it would sit there until you've defined the classification, but the default is move to quarantine. And then who is notified? Same thing with all these other messages. So for example, if a message is classified as safe, green, what do we do with the original message? Makes sense, the only real answer there would be to move it back to the original folder, but also notify the submitter. If a message is a threat, what do you want us to do with it? Here again, what are the options we have here? It's either move it back or leave it, default being leave it. But who gets notified? Submitter is always notified, but do you as an administrator want to be notified? This is where you define all these. And I believe most of these are going to be the default, but we walk through all of this as part of the onboarding. The last one here is interesting. I talked about the need for security awareness education training and the fact that we urge organizations to continue to do that on a regular basis. What we found over the ensuing 4 years of the release of IDR is that organizations were doing that and users were doing what they should, which was they were submitting the SAE messages for review. But our automation and human analysis was actually inadvertently triggering the report back from the SAE vendor as a negative, because we actually activate the content, so the user was getting dinged inappropriately. So we did add SAE training messages into the system so that we can identify as these are coming in. And if a user does submit them, which is the absolute right thing to do, that we then treat the messages differently. We don't analyze them. We don't submit them for automated review. We don't want the user to get dinged in an SAE report. So we actually set a different parameter here, which also goes into this setting here, which says, define your SAE vendor for us. And you'll notice we have quite a few of them in here, but you can add your own as well. You can give us IP addresses, you can give us subjects, you can give us sender information, however you need to, so that we know if that message is submitted, we compare it against our SAE list. If it matches, we then send back a completely different response to the end user. But again, we don't perform any level of analysis. It simply ends up in the quarantine and the user is acknowledged for doing the right thing. So again, we have quite a few vendors in here, but you can always add one specifically as well if you need to. Notification settings, we talked a little bit about this. This is where you get into a little bit of different ones, particularly on the SAE side. You can get a little bit more specific on there. But the real key here is when we come into the quarantine. I mentioned this is where you could go and see a lot of information about what's happening here. And so you can see, again, this is all demo data here, so nothing we're particularly sensitive or showing you that's worrisome. But you can see all the messages that have been submitted here. And you can sort all these columns, or you can actually sort here again by doing things like this. So you'll see I can show all the messages that were classified as phishing. You can see the subject, who the sender was, relative information here. You can see many of these had multiple recipients as part of them. You can see what the action was. We moved it to quarantine because it was malicious. It was remaining in quarantine. Nobody's requested it to come back, as I noted. But if you click on the ellipses here, you actually get a bunch more information. And remember, earlier on, we were talking about classifications. I noted that you could have messages forwarded to the quarantine, but not to Go Secure. This is where you could come in, open the email from here, download the email, take a look at it. You could designate a classification. But more importantly here, we can show the logs. And when we show the logs, it shows you that history. So the message was reported, the message was moved to quarantine, it's been classified by as phishing messages, so it's malicious, so it remains in quarantine. But notice here that the original submitter was this shardison at edwavedemo.com. And then notice at the top here that the global redaction, that incident response component that I talked to you about, where we actually scan the mail store to go find other copies of the same message. This is what happened here is we had the message, it was deemed as malicious, so we performed an immediate scan of the message store and found another copy of that same message. That's the power of the global redaction. It automatically found it and pulled it out of the other ones as well. No input, no intersection at all with you as an administrator. This happens automatically, but you can see the response and the feedback here within the quarantine. So lots of power here in the quarantine, lots of information. You can export this information to Excel, do what you want with it from there. But this shows you everything that's going on. And without any further ado, let's go back here real quickly to my inbox and see what we have going on in here. So, I submitted that message, and here is the response that I received for the submission, as noted, that this message has been submitted. Thank you for submitting. While it's been analyzed, it's no longer in your inbox. Very good. Good to know. That came through at 10:25. At 10:33, so this one here a little bit later, came back through as yellow light, proceed with caution. Why yellow light? That means that the content of the message was not malicious, whether there's an attachment, whether there's a link, but the body of the message had suspicious elements, things we've seen in other malicious campaigns. So in this particular case here, this is saying be cautious. We don't know for sure. Please take a look at it. Call if you need to. Do anything other than click on those until you validate for sure this really came from who it claims to be from and it really is safe. That's the value of IDR, both from an end user perspective. I showed you exactly how this works from an end user perspective, but also from you as an administrator. You now see that everything we've talked about here does work. You would see this in the quarantine, and you can rest assured that your users are protected and your organization is protected. So with that, I will draw us to a close. I will end on our live demo slide here, even though we've already seen that. I will thank everyone for their time. We are at 45 minutes after the hour. There are a number of documents in the GoToWebinar control panel. So if you need any specific to IDR, other research document that we put out there, I urge you all to grab those from there. And thank you all very much for joining, and hopefully you'll join us again at another one soon.